It'll take a little while to get through the flip chart here. I think when we did it before, it took about 90 minutes or so to run through here. I appreciate all of you that are here in the auditorium. Guys here in the auditorium have any questions as I go through here, just wave your hand or yell at me or whatever, and I'll try to answer them as quick as possible. Otherwise, I'm going to run through here fairly fast on the flip chart. And some of you have attended these before. We did it, the last time I did it was before the pandemic. So we wanted to do another one, even though our flip chart hasn't changed that much. We wanted to do another one to give everybody the opportunity to hear what we have to say about it and to ask any questions. If you have a flip chart that is not quite like the one that we're going to run through here today, don't worry about it. We changed it a little bit since the last time, but not much. There's just 3 or 4 places where we've added a comment or two. So for those of you that are watching from your desk and you have your flip chart in front of you, you can just make some notes if you want to with the changes. If you have one of the old flip charts that's really old and it's not really close to what this one is, then let us know. Get a hold of Risk, because we've got new ones, and we'll get new ones to you so you can have those. So it's really important, I believe, to go over your flip charts fairly frequently. We've always tried to in the past, in individual departments when I was working there, we tried to go through the flip charts at least once a year. Probably better to do it 2 or 3 times a year just to refresh your memory. The value for the flip, and what I should say also is this is a generic type of flip chart that applies to all facilities and all departments. If a department wants us to come to them to present the flip chart training directly to their employees, we'll be glad to do that. We've done that in the past. We'll do it again. There are sometimes specifics in each facility or workplace that they may want to add to their flip chart, actually, so to be more specific to what they're doing in that particular work location for emergencies. So we'll be glad to do this. The biggest advantage for a flip chart is not, as you might think, to have it available when there's emergency going on, because some emergencies will happen too fast for you to pick up that flip chart and flip to the right page and look what you're supposed to do. There are some slower developing emergencies type of things that you can do that, but some of the ones that are more urgent, more immediately life-threatening, those are the ones you need to have in your mind what you're going to do ahead of time. So the value of the flip chart is a training aid, really, to have that to where we can go through it when we're doing this training, so you can have it available to you where you can flip through it at any time and refresh your memory on things that you should do. And so we're going to go ahead and run through this. And I will say, before I get to the part on active shooter, I will cover that briefly. But as you know, we're doing an active shooter class that we recommend our employees to sign up for. We haven't done any in the last month or two, but we did several of them earlier this year, and we had quite a good turnout. And so we plan to schedule 1 or 2 more sessions of that in January. So if you are interested in that, or you have coworkers who are interested in it, just email me and we'll get you put on the list for that. But we go really into detail on the actions you can take individually, whether you're here in the workplace or whether you're out and about somewhere else, actions you can take to be prepared and respond to an active shooter event. And that particular class lasts about 3.5 hours. So, and we've had some pretty good feedback on it. So we intend to keep doing that. So going ahead with the flip chart, as I said, there may be some little differences on what you have in your hand. The most recent flip chart hard copies pretty much follow what I'm going to show you here today, but the front page that I'm showing you right now, it does have the county seal on it. So it's a little bit different on the front page. The language, though, is pretty much the same. And we always say at the very beginning, in any life-threatening situation, you immediately call 911. We've had instances in the past where people have thought, well, I need to get a hold of my supervisor or my manager if I have a situation develop. Well, in a lot of situations, that's true. If situations are, maybe not that urgent, where you're not life-threatening, or where there's, maybe it's just a confrontation situation where there's a patron that you're arguing with, or that's has some issues, but it's not threatening, is not, doing anything that may be immediately perceived as a threat to you personally or to the county. But if it's a life-threatening situation, you need to call 911 right away. And the way I like to explain it is, if it's a situation, if you were somewhere else, you weren't here in your workplace, and you saw this situation developing, it was a threat to you or people around you, or it was an accident where people were, injured or that type of thing, or it was a crime in progress. If you were out and about on your own, you'd probably call 911. And that's what you got to do here. You got to do the same thing here. Your supervisor, you can notify your supervisor after the fact if you can, as the emergency progresses, but don't waste time notifying your supervisor unless they happen to be in the office right next door and you can yell right at them. But, you need to take action, call 911. Nobody's going to get mad at you for calling 911 if it turns out to be a false alarm. I've talked to this many times with our law enforcement officers, and they'll say, I'd rather respond to 99 false alarms than miss that one out of 100 that's not a false alarm. So this happens to them all the time. It's part of their job. They want to be notified if there's something that could be potentially happening out there that they need to deal with. So, moving on. And in some of the fine print, I'm going to cover briefly, and some of it I'm going to kind of skip over. You all can kind of look at it later if you want more detail. But when we have an emergency at any facility, then the senior county official at that facility will be the initial incident commander until law enforcement arrives, or fire department arrives, or EMS arrives, whoever has to respond to that particular emergency. And when the first responders arrive, they'll have a senior officer who will take incident command. But until that happens, the person who's the senior official at a facility will be the one who is the incident commander. And they will have to take the actions that need to be taken to deal with that emergency. And then when the first responders arrive, they will tie in with them to provide assistance and advice and information to them as the incident progresses. And I have it listed on that first page who your facility coordinator is, or your emergency coordinator, who would be the senior official, the incident commander. And typically you would have somebody designated as a backup. Individual departments are responsible for employee tracking and accountability during emergencies. So what we recommend that you have log out or log in charts or confidential employee cell phone number list readily available. So your supervisor has those in case you have to evacuate the building, or you have to move to a different part of the building. And then you have to tie in with, that person has to tie in with the first responders and let them know, okay, this is how many people I have here today. This is where they are. Or if you need to, you have that employee cell phone list with you, so you can, if you don't know where somebody's at, you can call them on their cell phone and say, where are you? Are you involved here where this emergency is going on, or are you out somewhere else doing something different? So those things are two very important tools I think you need to have in place. And so you can fill in the blanks on this as you're familiar with before, those of you that have flip charts. So employees in whatever building or department you are, you fill in, and you should be familiar with the evacuation routes and assembly areas when you have to do a roll call after evacuating a building. You need to know when and how to evacuate the building. You need to know that you will be informed of emergency actions for non-evacuation events, because we don't always evacuate. And we'll talk about that a little bit. Locations of your emergency equipment. A lot of us walk by this stuff every day, but if you ask us where the fire extinguisher is or where the AED is, we have to stop and think about it. So you have an opportunity here to fill in on your flip chart where your nearest equipment is, emergency equipment is, including first aid kits and your fire alarm pull station, as well as AEDs, fire extinguishers, your safety data sheets, where a lot of your departments have those. And if you have employees, your coworkers, that you know are trained in first aid, CPR, or AED, have their information put down in their contact information so you can call on them if you have a medical event, and you may be able to get them to help after you've called 911 and you have first responders on the way. And typically each department or division has a safety rep. We have sort of let our safety rep committee that we had here in administration building, we've kind of let it slide during the pandemic. We hope to get that started up again and be able to have periodic meetings where we'll have the safety reps come by and talk about different safety things that they need to be having in place, and particularly with regard to being prepared for emergencies, whether it's an evacuation or a shelter in place or whatever. You can fill in information on where the risk management phone numbers are. Everybody in risk management except my phone number, don't put mine down. But anyway, yeah, you can put mine down at least for another couple months. And then we talk about building closures a little bit and who makes those decisions, but which would typically be the county manager in most cases for if you wanted to have a building closure for a certain period of time after an initial evacuation has taken place. And one thing important here that you should look at is if you have any facility evacuation or closure, your employees need to be sure that have evacuated, that they need to stay outside of the emergency perimeter until directed otherwise. What we've seen happen in fire evacuations sometimes is when we've done a test evacuation, a fire drill, and set off the fire alarm. And we have, I think the last time we did it here, we deliberately stopped the fire alarm when most of the people were out of the building, but not everybody. And some of the people that were walking out the front door turned around and came back in when the fire alarm went off. And we were standing there saying, nope. Just because the fire alarm went off, stopped going off, doesn't mean that it's safe to come back in. You have to go to your assembly area and wait for a word from the chain of command that it is safe for you to go back in. Once you're evacuating a building, you never go back in for any reason. Even, if you forgot your laptop or your purse or whatever, well, that's going to have to stay there. You don't go back in for any reason. So we talk about evacuation decisions. I'll get into that a little bit more as we go through here. But typically it would be if it's not a fire alarm going off, and we're going to talk about when it's automatic evacuation, but if it's an evacuation that has to be a decision that has to be made by somebody, it'll be the senior official at the facility who is the facility emergency coordinator. Or if he's not here, he should have a designee or any department or division manager. If they're the only ones here, then they need to assume that responsibility. Okay, evacuations are always automatic and immediate for visible fire or smoke, active shooter in the building, if you can leave your work area and the building without being visible to the shooter, and we're going to talk about that a little more too. Gas leak inside the building, and fumes impairing breathing if all areas of facility are affected. And sometimes we've had incidents in the past where there's been fumes in one section of the building for whatever reason, and we've had to move people to the other side of the building. But if it's inside the building and permeating throughout the whole structure, the whole inside of the building, then it's going to be an automatic evacuation. Now, I will say one thing as to clarify this, but short time ago, a couple months ago, we did have a gas leak at one of our facilities. And we did not evacuate to the facilities where the gas leak smell was, and people said, well, why didn't we? Because it should have been an automatic evacuation. Well, it goes back to, this is where I need to clarify the language, the verbiage here. I'm saying a gas leak inside the building. Well, there was a gas smell at those two buildings, but the gas smell was at the front entrance. And it was really stronger outside. And there wasn't a gas smell in the other parts of the building. So what does that tell you? That tells you the gas leak's not in the building, it's outside. And you don't want to evacuate outside where the gas leak's at. But we had people who were, people who were on the scene there, our employees, they did exactly what they were supposed to. They assessed the situation and found out where the gas leak smell was and said, no, it's not inside the building, so we're not going to evacuate outside. And so it's requires sometimes that person who's the incident commander or whoever is on the scene doing the initial assessment to make a decision on certain things. But it doesn't invalidate, I think, what I wrote here, because that wasn't a gas leak inside the building. So if it's a gas leak inside the building, we will pretty much automatically evacuate. Evacuations are not automatic and should not be implemented for incidents other than those listed above unless recommended by the fire department or police department or directed by the facility emergency coordinator. And there's one thing on here that I've had people ask in the past, well, there's one other thing where we should automatically evacuate, and you don't have it on here. Any of you know what that is? What that could be? I knew you were here for some reason, Annette, to give the proper answer, so you get a gold star today. A bomb threat. You don't always evacuate for bomb threat. And it depends on the situation, it has to be assessed. And we'll talk about that a little bit later too when we talk about bomb threats. And then we talk about the evacuation points, which is where you assemble if we do evacuation for any incident other than an active shooter. And we'll talk about that also. And some of this is more for the actual department or division managers, that they need to notify all of the people in the other departments in the building or in neighboring buildings if for some reason they have to evacuate. And we had an incident a few years ago where in Lake Havasu complex where there was an evacuation, and well, I should say there was not evacuation. But there was an incident where at probation down there was a probationer that came in for his visit to his probation officer, and the probation officer went outside and looked at the guy's car, investigated the car to see if he saw any evidence of anything that would violate the parole. And so what he saw was a pipe bomb in the guy's back seat. And so they called the fire department and law enforcement, but they didn't notify anybody else in the complex. So the first thing that happened was, here come all the emergency vehicles showing up in the parking lot, and people are standing at the windows saying, well, why are they showing up out here? And they're standing at the windows when there could be a bomb going off out in the parking lot, which isn't a very good thing. The other thing that happened was one of the other departments got a call. They didn't know what was going on out in the parking lot, but they got a call from, I think it was UPS or FedEx, and says, we can't deliver your package today because of the bomb out in your building. And that was the first that person had heard about it. So you can see the complications that ensue if not everybody is notified when something's going on inside of a building or inside of a complex, and things start happening that you don't want to happen. So that's very important that we have that communication. Now, we also have available in all of our buildings, if we want to do an evacuation notice manually, when it's not an automatic evacuation, when we use our phone consoles, and we need to test that more often. We tested it a while back, and we're going to test it again. But we should be able to go on our phone system and reach out to most phones and do a PA address over your phone. Now, not every phone has that, but there should be several phones in each department that has that capability where we can get on there and say, here's what you need to do in this emergency. The problem that could ensue with that is if you have your phone volume turned down, then you might not hear that message. So that's an issue with that. But right now, that's the only means we have, since we don't have another type of PA system that like some buildings have. That's the means we have by phone call notification through the console, but then we would also be talking directly to the department heads or the division managers to let them be sure that they know and can get the word out to the employees that may not have heard the message over the phone. Okay, and department safety reps, division safety reps, typically they're the ones who, besides looking around for trip and fall hazards and different type of safety hazards in a particular division or department, they're the ones who would assist in an emergency evacuation. A lot of times they're the ones who be sure that do a walkthrough to be sure that everybody's out of the building in evacuation. A lot of times they're the ones that do the roll call out at the assembly point when you do an evacuation. So every department and division really should have a safety rep, and they can work directly with risk management on preparedness for a lot of different types of emergencies. I've already pretty much touched on this, that the facility emergency coordinator is the one in incident command until first responders get here. If you know in your facility where the initial command post is, you can fill that in here. Initial command post here at this building is out by the flagpoles in front. It could very well shift later on when first responders get here, but that's where the command post would be. That's also the place where when all of you go to your individual assembly areas out in the parking lot, you can, and you do your roll call, that's where you would take the information on your roll call to the incident command post, so that the senior official, the emergency coordinator for the facility, would be able to get that information from you as to whether all of your people are accounted for or not. And that information can then be provided to first responders as they show up. And depending on the threat, it'll depend, the incident commander, obviously if it's a criminal threat, active shooter threat or active shooter incident, it's going to be law enforcement that's going to be taken over as the overall incident commander. If it's a fire situation, in fire department. So it just depends on what the situation is. So we're now going to get into the individual hazards or events that could happen. So if you have a serious injury or illness of one of your employees, you don't want to move a seriously injured person unless there's a life-threatening situation, and that particularly pertains if that person has fallen. Because if they fell, they could have, and particularly if they fell a long distance, but even it could happen even for shorter falls, they could have hit their head or their spine, and they could have either head or spinal injuries, and you don't want to move them unless they're in a life-threatening situation. If it's a situation where you got a fire in the room and that person has fallen, obviously you're going to have to drag them out if you can. But otherwise, if they're not immediately threatened, you need to wait till the professionals get here, the EMS people, to be able to handle those type of injuries. As I'd indicated earlier, when you're calling, while you're calling 911, when you're calling 911, if you have another employee nearby, have them reach out to the nearest employee that has first aid, CPR, AED training. They may be able to help. AED is, even if you're not trained in using an AED, they're set up nowadays to where just about anybody can use it. You take them out of the box, and it'll actually, once you start activating them, it'll start talking to you and tell you what to do. It'll give you directions, and you're not going to get into trouble. You just follow directions and try to do as much as possible in accordance to what they're telling you to do. But you're not going to get any kind of trouble because you're covered by Good Samaritan law in Arizona. So, and a lot of times, and if you're not familiar with AED training, a lot of times if you've done everything right and you're trying to activate the AED and it doesn't go off, that usually means that machine is smart enough. It's going to determine whether that person has a heartbeat or not. And they're not going to give them a shock if they don't need it. So, and we do have AED, first aid, and CPR training. We just did it a week ago and had several of our employees go through that. So if you're interested in having that training, again, you can let RISC know and we'll get it scheduled for you. Also, we're going to set up some training for Stop the Bleed. We're going to bring some of that in. So I think public health already does some of that. And we have got tourniquets and other things that we've ordered that you can use in a Stop the Bleed situation that are going to be put at each of our AED stations. And also, I think we're going to provide a second kit for each department besides what's at the AED station, so that we'll have Stop the Bleed kits available if it gets into a situation. Hopefully not, but if we get into an active shooter situation or something like that. And we talk a little bit here if a person is bleeding, how you can apply heavy pressure to the wound, or if they're actually conscious, have them do it. But otherwise, you can choose to do so and protect yourself from exposure if you can by having something on your hand, clothing, a towel, or sometimes just a plastic bag, garbage bag that we use in our garbage cans can be used to protect yourself. But as those of you who've had bloodborne pathogen know, you're not really exposed unless you get it on your face or unless it's on a portion of your skin where you may have an opening in your skin. You can have blood all over your arm, and if you don't have any openings on your skin, then you're really not exposed. So we try to protect ourselves as much as possible from that, but it's a lot of times people think they're exposed just because they got blood on them, and that's not necessarily the case. But of course, the high risk area is if you get it in your face, and there's a lot of ways that it can penetrate into your body from in your face. Don't transport an injured person in a county vehicle unless you're in a location out in the field without a cell phone or landline service, and it looks like you're going to have to transport that person because you can't call. But whenever you get back within cell phone service, you should call 911 as soon as possible. And one thing I want to touch upon is if we have a worker, an employee who refuses ambulance transport when you've called, well, number one, you may have some people that are having a medical event and they're saying, no, don't call 911. Well, if they're having a serious medical event, don't listen to them. Call 911. And when the ambulance gets here, that person, assuming they're conscious and talking to the EMTs, they can decide whether they want to be transported or not. The EMTs will make a determination as to what their injury or their illness is and say, oh, I think you're okay, or they'll say, you need to be transported. They can make a decision at that time whether they want to be transported or not. And personally, if an EMT told me I needed to be transported, I would go, even though I don't know whether I might end up having to pay for the ambulance bill or not. I probably will, since it's probably not a workers' comp incident. If it's an incident, it's an illness that I have, but I'm probably going to go. And I think that's probably the wise thing to do. But we have had employees say, no, I'm not going to go. I don't want to pay for that. And then when the ambulance leaves, then they turn and ask another employee, okay, will you take me to the hospital? And that's not a good idea either. Number one, you're not going to take them, if you were inclined to take them because you feel like you should because they're a friend of yours, you're not going to take them in a county vehicle and you're not going to take them on county time because that creates way too much liability for the county because the ambulance service has said, we need to transport you and they need to go in an ambulance. If we start taking them in a county vehicle or a county employee that's on county time, then the liability is going to come back to us. If that person dies on the way or if there's something happens where they're having an issue and whoever's driving doesn't pay attention and then runs into somebody else, that just shouldn't happen. And if you want to do that on your own, say I'm taking time off now, I'm going to take this person in my own car, that's something that it's up to each individual to decide, but you need to be aware that you're also assuming liability for that person. But really what should happen is that person, if they don't want to be transported by an ambulance, they should be calling one of their family members and say, can you come and get me and take me to the hospital? That's what should happen. Public health emergencies, and we have public health here, so I'm not going to talk about them. But anyway, this is just a brief thing and that we had in place before the pandemic, and it actually happened just like we say here in this little blurb. And public health started issuing directives as to what we should do. In this case for COVID-19, this is how we're going to follow the guidelines that's being provided by the CDC. So we've all been through that. Fire procedure. If the fire is in a room, you need to close the door to the room after all the occupants leave. That's going to prevent the fire from spreading. And particularly, we want to keep the smoke from spreading first, because the smoke is what's going to get people. In some cases, the fire can spread really fast. Other cases, it spreads slower, but the smoke is going to fill up the facility pretty fast. So anyway, that's what we need to do. We need to be sure the doors are closed. You need to use the closest fire alarm pull station to sound the alarm. And you need to call 911 from a safe location. So typically you would be outside. Maybe get outside before you need to call 911. If you've been trained and are comfortable in using a fire extinguisher, and it appears that the fire is small enough to be safely extinguished, you may do so, but only if you have a safe exit behind you and a buddy with you looking for hazards. Do not go into any smoky room. Leave immediately if one extinguisher does not do the job. Don't be a hero. We don't expect you to be a fireman. You know, there are some cases where there might be a little fire where you can, with the fire extinguisher, you can put it out. But in a lot of cases, it's not going to work. So we don't expect, that's not part of your job to put out the fire. So it's better for you to get out of there and leave it up to the fire department when they get there. Typically in a building like this, we're going to have the sprinkler system go off anyway, and it'll be dampening down the fire, hopefully. So just something that you need to be aware of. Leave the building immediately by walking to the nearest exit and proceed to your assembly area. It talks about how you can do it single file down the right side if you're coming down the stairway, so you're not cluttering up the entire stairway. If you don't use the elevators, obviously, and if you encounter heavy smoke, stay low or crawl to the exit, cover your mouth and nose. Close all doors and windows, shut off lights, electrical equipment, and fans, only if this can be done quickly. Your first priority is to get out of the building, so don't worry about shutting off a lot of stuff unless you can just do it on the way out. Don't lock the doors. If you have a manual lock on your door, if they lock automatically, don't worry about it. You can go ahead and close them. I'll guarantee you the fire department will get in that door if they need to. On your way out, warn others as you're passing on the way out. As I mentioned earlier, typically you'll have somebody, a safety rep or somebody will be designated to sweep through the building very quickly. Help those with less mobility and visitors to the exits. So the visitors you have in the building, you're going to have to take care of. And each department or division should plan in advance on how they're going to do that. And the ones that deal directly with the members of the public should have a plan for that. And we're talking about sweeping an individual workspace. Some of our people who have been designated as sweepers, we have to clarify them with what we mean on that. By sweeping, we mean you do a quick walkthrough and yell into or look or yell into every area where there might be somebody that might, for some reason, not have heard the fire alarm go off. Whether it's be sure and in the restrooms is one place, and in file rooms and things like that. Be sure you've checked everything, but you go through quickly. You're not there to do a thorough inspection and to take your time or to do anything else. It's just do a sweep on the way out. And you check in at your assembly area, do a counting of all your employees, and bring the information to the command post. Once again, don't leave the evacuation area without approval of your supervisor, the fire department, or police department, but typically it's going to be your supervisor with a word coming down from the senior official. Under no circumstances re-enter the building. Inside gas leak or respiratory impairing fumes. If you have a strong natural gas, rotten egg smell, or fumes causing respiratory distress inside the building, exit the building immediately to evacuation assembly areas. Do not turn on or off or unplug any light switch, electrical appliance, AC, or heat due to the spark hazard. Do not use cell phones or radios inside the building. Again, there could be a spark. It doesn't happen very often, but there could be a spark from those devices as well. Call 911 from another building or an outside cell phone. Hazmat incident. Other than the gas leak or respiratory impairing fumes, if the incident is outside the building, obviously we won't evacuate. We'll wait, get a determination from either the senior official at the building or the fire department when they show up as to what we should do. If you're directed to shelter in place, close all outside doors or windows and seal around edges using duct tape. Shut down AC or heating system, close all vents. This seems like a given where I say do not panic. But we have had situations where people, when you're sheltering in place and you're waiting for instructions, that's when people start to imagine things in their mind. So I haven't heard anything from somebody. Why aren't they telling me anything? What's going on? I think I smell something, that's suspicious. I need to get the hell out of here. So you should do everything possible to remain calm and to help your coworkers remain calm so that they don't get panicked and do something they shouldn't do. If directed to do so, cover your mouth and nose with a handkerchief, cloth, paper towels, or tissues. Move to interior rooms away from windows and doors. That's what you want to do if the incident is outside. If it's inside the building, if you smell fumes, report it to your supervisor immediately. Do not evacuate building until source of the fumes is located and you're told to do so by your supervisor or safety rep. It may be an outside incident with fumes seeping inside, like the one I referred to earlier. Move people away from the apparent toxic source and close off that area of the building. Shut down the AC or heating system only if it is not a natural gas smell, because when you're shutting off electrical things using the electrical system, there again, you could cause a spark. Call 911 if toxic chemicals come into contact with skin or eyes, and flush with clean water for at least 15 minutes. Facility coordinator will follow recommendation of the fire officer in charge. And there again, we go through, if you're directed to evacuate, you go through the same drill as you would for a fire evacuation. If you're outside and you get into a toxic cloud of some kind, hazardous material cloud, if you're outside, whether it's however you get involved into that situation, whether it's something that you drove when you're driving down the road and you get involved in that situation, or if it's when you're walking outside, what you need to do is, unless you know where that spill is located, because you can't see what's going on because of possibly the toxic cloud, then you need to move upwind as much as possible from the source of the spill, if you know where the source of the spill is. However, if you don't know where the source of the spill is, and you're in a chemical plume, and particularly if you start to experience coughing, burning eyes, that sort of thing, then you need to try to move perpendicular to where the cloud is, to where the wind direction. You can usually tell where the wind direction is around Kingman. But so if you know which way the direction of the wind is, move perpendicular to that, and that'll get you out of the cloud quicker, because the cloud's going to be following the wind, and it's not going to be spreading out to the side. Bomb threat. If you receive a bomb threat by phone, remain calm and attempt to obtain information from caller using the bomb threat card questions, and those are on the little yellow cards that a lot of you have, and we have some of those if you don't have one at your desk. Those are questions that have been around for 30-some years or longer, that was originally developed by the Postal Service for people calling in there, and a lot of the questions are pretty good. Try to get the caller to say where the bomb is or what their name is. You say, well, they're not going to tell you that. Well, they might, because these people who are calling in bomb threats usually aren't rocket scientists. And if you catch them by surprise and ask them something like that, they may actually tell you something. And so, you try to do that. You record the time of the call and any info you have on your phone display. If you keep them on the line, try to pass a note to your coworker to call 911. And don't hang up, even if the caller does, because if you keep an open line, that may help first responders and dispatch to maybe track the call. Call 911 on a landline only and report your name, location, telephone number. So why do we say on a landline only? Yeah, it'll go 911. You can dial 911 on a cell phone. Also, what does a cell phone does? What is that? It's a radio signal, isn't it? And if that bomb has a remote control on it, it's possible that you're using a cell phone or using a radio, and that's what first responders have to be careful about, using their radio. You could have a radio frequency that might accidentally set that bomb off. So that's why we say that. Now, clarify, most bomb threats are fake. You all know that. We get a lot of them at the courts, and it's usually some idiot who doesn't want to go to his court hearing that day, so he calls in that morning and says there's a bomb in the building, and a lot of times they're able to catch those people. But that does happen. But nonetheless, we have to treat bomb threats as potentially serious. But we evaluate them and determine whether we want to evacuate or not, because a lot of times that's what they're trying to do, like they do with the courts. They're trying to shut down your business for whatever reason. But we want to be sure that it doesn't appear to be a real threat. And that's why law enforcement needs to evaluate the situation with the facility, senior official at our facility, and determine what you want to do. And usually it's up to us to decide. Our senior official needs to decide whether they're going to evacuate or not. But like I said, most calls, most bomb threats are fake, but we have to still look at it to be sure, assess the situation, to be sure we don't feel that it might be a real event. Facility coordinator will obtain law enforcement's advice on whether the threat is credible and decide on either initiating a walkthrough facility inspection with law enforcement or ordering an immediate evacuation. And typically what happens is there is a walkthrough. If you feel like it might be a credible threat, there's a walkthrough with law enforcement to see if you see anything suspicious that's out of place. And sometimes that's hard to determine, but that's usually why you have somebody from the facility along with law enforcement to say, if they ask, well, is that box sitting over there in that corridor, is that unusual, or is that normally set there? And they can usually say that, well, yeah, that's been there. But sometimes it doesn't. When I was in Kansas as an emergency manager, we had a bomb threat at our school, and when it was evacuated, the sheriff and the local town marshal walked through the building to see if there was anything suspicious, and there was, in a long corridor, there was something sitting there right in the middle of that long corridor. I don't remember if it was a backpack or a box or whatever. And the first thing, and the town marshal was kind of, since it was a small town, it was kind of a Barney Fife. He was a Barney Fife type of guy, So the first thing he does is he goes up to the box and picks it up and starts shaking it and listening to it. And the sheriff told me later, he says, I almost shot him right then. He says, I almost pulled my gun and shot him right then. Because that's the last thing you want to do if you think there's a suspicious box, is to start shaking it and listening for it. I talk about take a note of any suspicious packages that you see if there's a bomb threat, and let your supervisor know about it. Talked about use of cell phones and radios. You may be directed to a different assembly area because it could be determined that it might be somebody's trying to get you outside of the building, get us outside the building for some reason, and the bomb's actually in the car in the parking lot. So that's one reason why you don't want to evacuate if you don't think it's a credible threat, in case they're trying to get you out of the building to do some kind of mischief outside. So, but it's possible that you might be directed to, instead of going out of your normal evacuation route, go out another door to stay away from cars in the parking lot. That's always a possibility that could happen. When you're, contrary to when you're doing a fire evacuation, you want to leave your inside doors open because that's going to facilitate if they have to bring a robot in to look at the building. It's going to facilitate them doing that. And we do have 3 FBI certified bomb squads in Mojave County. We're really lucky because hardly any county has that. One in each of the 3 big cities, and they all have robots. And they love to use the robots, so they'll come in and use them if they need to. And again, if evacuation is not ordered, but you think maybe there might be a threat outside, then everybody needs to stay away from outside windows and move to the interior. Lockdown procedures. Facility coordinators will decide on lockdown, preferably after receiving recommendation from law enforcement, but also on their own initiative if threat appears to be imminent. They'll direct the department heads or division managers or their designees to get the word to all of their staff. And there again, we'll try to use the phone system, the console system to communicate that information, but we'll do a backup by notifying directly every department head or division manager so they can follow a secondary procedure for trying to get a hold of all their employees and getting the word to them. And that includes getting the word to employees that may be outside of the building that don't know what's going on inside, which is another reason for being able to use that list of numbers that you can, of your individual employees' cell phones, so you can get a hold of them if they're outside or doing some business elsewhere and say, don't come back to the building right now. Okay, if you're bringing all your employees inside, if they're outside, non-employees attempting to enter the building should not be admitted and told to immediately leave the area. Non-employees already in the building should be checked by security and not allowed to leave, because we don't know whether that person is harmless or not. Close and lock all exterior doors and windows. Move away from exterior doors and windows. Cover or draw blinds over exterior windows. Lock interior doors if doing so does not inhibit escape through at least one exit other than the front door. If safe areas with back exits are identified, move to those areas. Facility coordinator will be prepared to provide information to police officers when they arrive on the scene. So suspicious mailing or powder. Suspicious mail or packages can be identified by the following traits, and I won't go through all of those. Some of them you look at and say, well, you're not going to get a package like that. Well, there again, people that send suspicious packages are like the ones who do bomb threats. They're not rocket scientists. And a lot of times you can detect something that's a suspicious package by seeing if they have the incorrect address, if it's addressed to a person, is their name spelled wrong? Do they have the wrong title? Are they misspelling common words? Do you have protruding wires or aluminum foil protruding from the package? You think, well, that's not going to happen. Well, it does happen. And and a ticking sound, of course. You need to be watching out for that, although a lot of things nowadays, a lot of the timers aren't going to be ticking. So these are all indications of a suspicious mailing or that could have a potential bomb or could be a suspicious powder, some kind of toxic material that you were looking out for. If a package, envelope, or document or other material has a stain that appears to be blood, you're going to have to go to the bloodborne pathogen protocol on that. And if a suspicious mailing or powder is identified, obviously you want to call 911 just like you do on other emergencies. If you've opened a package or it's somehow something seeped out of there that's got on your desk or got on your hands or whatever, you need to stay at your desk and notify your supervisor by phone. If you've got powder on you, don't jump up and run into your supervisor's office and scatter powder all through the department, because that's not a good idea. And there again, a lot of these things that we're seeing now are not really toxic material of any kind or dangerous material, but it could be something that was associated with the shipping of an item or whatever is in the envelope. So we follow bomb threat procedures if we think it could involve a bomb in that package. Limit the number of persons exposed to any suspicious item. Do not pick up, handle, touch, smell, or otherwise closely inspect any suspicious powder or substance. Anyone who's handled a suspicious item should thoroughly wash hands with soap and water. If you've touched your face or your body parts after examining the suspicious item, those surfaces should also be washed. If powder is on clothing, avoid moving and spreading the powder to other locations. Full decontamination, including removal of clothing and personal items, may not be warranted and probably won't be warranted because we don't see that happen very often. When we had the incident after 911 where there was a lot of suspicious powders going out, and I think, if I remember correctly, I think wasn't that ricin that was in that particular thread? I don't remember what it was, but there was somebody that was actually putting that in envelopes and sending it to people. And there was kind of a panic at that time because everybody thought that every suspicious package that had some kind of powder in it was dangerous. And when I was in Kansas at that time, and there was a suspicious package that came in. It wasn't that suspicious, but it was a package that's one of our county employees in the courthouse there had ordered. It was a personal item they had ordered, which I'm not sure they should have had it delivered to their workplace anyway. But it was something they had ordered. It was glassware, and when she opened it up, a bunch of powder flew out, and unfortunately, this particular employee was the panicky type. And but the sheriff and I investigated that, and we actually called the shipper, and they said, we're getting a lot of calls on this. We're going to have to stop doing it. But they were actually putting some kind of powder in there to keep the glassware from moving around. They inhibit it from moving around in there, and it was legitimate what they were doing. We determined it wasn't a credible threat. Unfortunately, the employee went home and called a hotline number in some other state and said, I've been exposed to suspicious powder. What should I do? And didn't explain the circumstances. And they told her to go to the hospital and be decontaminated. And then the next morning she came in and was telling everybody in the courthouse they needed to go get decontaminated. And the sheriff and I had to call a special meeting of everybody and set them down and say, this is not a credible threat. You're not contaminated. So anyway, you don't see this can happen, so we have to be careful. It's like a lot of these other incidents. We treat it as a potential dangerous situation, but most times it turns out to be a false alarm. And that's why you're not directed out in the parking lot and stripped off and hosed down with a fire hose anymore, because that was happening a lot back in those days. Okay, you have an aggressive or threatening customer or employee at the facility, any county work area, or the field. Attempt to placate customer, but do not say, please calm down, because a lot of times that just causes people to blow up more. Speak calmly and allow customer to vent. If individual refuses to calm down within 3 or 4 minutes and exhibits abusive, disruptive behavior, ask him or her to leave the facility or work area. If this happens to an employee in the field, employees should leave the area immediately and be certain you are not followed if that happens. If an individual at the facility refuses to leave, continue to talk to the individual, try to get him to calm down. Use a panic button if within reach, or use a code word. It doesn't necessarily have to be Edna, but if you have a code word in your particular department that all of your employees know, and I know some of our departments do, then use that in casual conversation to alert the other employee that's nearby. Hopefully there's more than one of you there. There should, in most cases, unless you're a one-person office, when you've got a situation like that developing, there should be a second employee that's watching what's going on while the first employee is talking to the individual. So they can alert that employee to call 911 and then notify the supervisor and the senior official, the facility emergency coordinator of the situation, but don't indicate to the agitated individual that police have been called, because sometimes that will set them off as well. If you feel that a threat of violence exists or the individual makes any kind of verbal threat to any person, group, or the county as a whole, leave the work area and call 911. Notify other employees in the area or facility as quietly as possible to leave the area without further agitating the customer. Call 911 even if the threatening individual has left the building, or if you're out in the field and if you leave the scene of a confrontation. If the individual does leave, watch from the window, a window, to verify that he or she does enter a vehicle and leaves. Do not follow outside. Okay, why do we say call 911 even if the individual has left? Yeah, if he's actually making physical threats, or what can be interpreted as threats to you or any other county employee or the county as a whole or anybody else, that's a criminal incident. And you don't know whether that guy is actually just calmed down and he was just blowing steam, or whether he's going to get a gun and is going to come back, or is maybe going to go to another county facility or even some other location and start shooting. And that's also why we say watch from a window to see if he goes to his car and leaves and doesn't get a gun out of his car and come back. But absolutely don't follow him outside. We have had that situation. We've had that happen where in departments where individual was very abusive and on the verge of being threatening, didn't appear to have a gun, and was a known customer or patron, I guess I would say, or client of that particular department. So they were familiar with this individual. But when he stormed out, he was followed outside by employees. And I don't know whether that was the intent to try to keep him calmed down, or that just to see, and in one case, followed that individual clear out of the parking lot and up the street. You do not want to do that. You don't want to follow an individual. I don't care what your personal relationship is with that client. If they're exhibiting that behavior, I know you're concerned about them, their well-being and everything, but that's not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to yourself and to the county. So don't be doing that situation. Confrontations between coworkers, similar to aggressive behavior with patrons or clients. Need to report any kind of threatening, unsafe, or irrational behavior of a coworker to a supervisor. If employee threatens violence or exhibits violent tendencies, there again, call 911. There again, it might be somebody you've worked with for a long time and you like that person and you are concerned about that person, but if they're exhibiting this kind of behavior, they have to be treated as a potential threat. Crime in progress, don't attempt to apprehend or interfere with a criminal, except in cases of self-protection where you may have to defend yourself. Do not argue with or provoke any armed or otherwise threatening individual. If safe to do so, take time to get a good description of the criminal. Note height, weight, sex, race, approximate age, clothing, method and direction of travel, and his or her name. You might not be able to get all of this stuff, but maybe you can get some of it. And note the type of vehicle and the make and model, and maybe you might be close enough to get the license plate number too. So when it's safe to do so, call 911. And what I'll say on this, on potential threat, is in a crime in progress, this applies to situations that, and we have had these situations as well, but it's situations if you have a patron inside the building, or a client, and that person has family members with them, and they start to exhibit abusive behavior toward that family member. A lot of people will say, well, it's their kid, what can I do about it? Well, what you should do about it is call 911. Because if it's an abusive situation, call 911, let them come and sort it out. Because that is a crime. And if we do not do that, happens in our facility, we do not do that, and then something very bad happens as a result of that abusive behavior, well, then it could come back on us, liability-wise, because we noticed that behavior and we did nothing. And obviously, our first concern is the safety of the people, the family members who are being threatened. We don't want those people hurt. That's the biggest thing. But the second thing is, as a risk manager, that I have to look at is the liability of the county, too. So don't be afraid to call 911. And in a situation like that, call 911 or, and get security involved and call risk. And, in a lot of these situations that happen in buildings, security or risk or both need to be notified anyway, as soon as possible. A shooting threat. There again, you can sort of use the same card that you use for bomb threats to ask questions as somebody who's making a shooting threat over the phone. And they follow the same steps with notifying supervisor and law enforcement. Okay, now we're talking about active shooter inside the building. And as I mentioned, we have an active shooter class that goes into this in a lot more detail. And you've all heard run, hide, and fight, emphasis on run, hide, and fight. And that is still the procedure you need to follow. But there's a lot of different aspects to that you can learn that will help your preparedness to be able to respond to any type of event. So run if you can do so safely. Usually that's your best option, to run. But you may not have that option. But obviously that's the best thing you can do if at all possible. So employees should avoid being trapped in their offices, even if the door can be locked, unless their only exit path is exposed to or toward the shooter. Then you may have to stay in your office anyway. Need to go, in case you're going to go into the hide mode. Alternate exits should be identified in advance, as well as any offices with strong locking doors and multiple exits or outside windows that could serve as safe evacuation routes. A safe room with door lock and no windows, heavy objects to barricade the door, and file cabinets or heavy furniture lining the walls may be a better alternative to leaving the building if the exit path is exposed to the shooter. So, one of the things you need to do when you're looking at your particular plan at your work location for an active shooter event is to determine if you have a safe room you could get to. And this is, we talk about this a lot in our active shooter training with the employees that show up. We've gone around and we've taken pictures of various rooms in different departments that can be used as safe rooms and discussed how those need to be used. And we're more than happy to come out, and we've done this with several departments. We're more than happy to come out and work directly with that department to determine where good safe rooms are, what they can do in terms of running, or what they can do in terms of fighting if you have to do that. So we're more than happy to do that, and it's a good thing to have those things in place ahead of time. But if you can run you need to exit by the facility by the perceived safest route away from the shooting using all available cover. Don't wait on orders from supervisors or law enforcement or anybody else to leave. You know, a lot of times when you talk to people who've been involved in active shooter events, they say, well, I heard this popping noise and I wasn't sure what to do. I thought maybe it was firecrackers. That happens. You hear them say that a lot. Now, honestly, except for the 4th of July, how many times during the course of your day that you hear firecrackers going off? Is it more likely you're going to hear firecrackers or gunshots? More likely you're going to hear gunshots, and you better react accordingly to the gunshot, which means, you know, head in the opposite direction. If you can identify where the shots are coming from, you need to be able, you know, have situational awareness. So you need to react immediately. And we get into this a lot more in our active shooter training. And typically at this point, I would normally show a video of run, hide, and fight. But I don't have it today. I wanted to keep this down to where we could get through this probably about an hour and a half, so I don't have that video. But we have a video that we show on run, hide, and fight that's very good. There's a lot of good ones out there, but we found one that was from the University of Utah. That's probably the best one I've ever seen. So if you want to look at a good run, hide, and fight video, Google the one that's from the University of Utah. Because it covers everything. It covers everything that we talk about in a situation like that. It talks about, you know, how you need to react immediately, how you need to get out of the building, the things you should do from that point. It's very good. If you have pre-designated safe areas that could be used potentially as a safe room for where you can hide in. But if they have exits that are away from where the gunfire is, then you can use those to run through those safe rooms, but you don't necessarily need to stay there and hide. You can just get out the back way. So it's always better if you have a safe area, if you've got a secondary exit from that, but you don't always have that option. So if you're unable to leave without presenting a target, silence your cell phone, stay quiet, lay on the floor and behind heavy objects, hopefully in a room, in a safe room that has a lock on it. If you don't have a room that has a lock on it, and hopefully the door is one that opens inward where you can put a heavy object up against that door to keep somebody from coming in. And what we teach in the active shooter training, we teach different ways to secure that door. And there's some very good methods of doing that. And you can prepare in advance on how to do that. You can do it by using chairs. You can do it by using your, sometimes a belt or other type of object to secure the hinge at the top of some of these doors, which allows it to come open and close. There's some very good things that can be used to secure a door. And so I encourage people to sign up for our active shooter classes so we can actually show you how to do those things. And we say when you're inside a room that you're using as a hiding place, obviously you want to silence your cell phone and avoid talking. We say to lay on the floor. And the reason for that is if there's shooting going on outside, or if the person suspects somebody's in that room and starts to shoot through the wall, those bullets are going to come through that wall. So, excuse me, so if you can be laying down, or you can be behind file cabinets or any type of heavy furniture, something that will stop or slow down a bullet, that's the best thing to do. Now, some of our training that we've been through with regard to when you're dealing with an active shooter says, well, you should be prepared. You should be standing up on either side of the door. So if that person gets through the door, then you could ambush them when in. And that is a good idea, but you're also standing up where bullets coming through the walls can hit you. So what I tell people when we're doing the active shooter class is, stay low to the floor, but pay attention to what's going on outside. If you've got the door blocked and that person, that shooter is actually trying to get through the door, that's the time when you stand up and get on each side of the door and get ready to ambush him, hit him with chairs or fire extinguishers or whatever. So it's not an either-or situation. Situation where you have to look at your options as the event transpires. And I'll talk about that a little bit more with regard to being prepared for any emergency situation, but it applies most of all to active shooter. So what we talk about repeatedly is to have situational awareness. So wherever you're at, if you're in your workplace, you're probably going to have more situational awareness than anywhere else because you're familiar with the surroundings, but you're also going to be a little more complacent because you're going to be focusing on your work. You're not necessarily going to be paying attention to everything going on around you. You're going to probably be more likely to do that if you're out and about. But the thing we hammer on over and over again in our training is you have to maintain situational awareness. And that means observing what's going on around you. And I use the analogy that it's the same thing you do when you're practicing defensive driving. When you're driving down the road, you're watching what's ahead of you. You're looking at potential hazard. You're looking at, is that light going to change before I get to it? Is this car coming in from the side street? Is it going to pull out in front of me? Is the car that's driving down next to me, is he weaving back and forth, or is he talking on his cell phone and not paying attention? So you need to be prepared by having that situational awareness. And we can't have situational awareness 100% of the time. That's just impossible. But by practicing it, you could increase your situational awareness of what's going on. And what that does is it gives you two things. Number one, it'll allow you maybe to detect a threat a lot quicker than you normally would have. Gives you more reaction time. And the other thing it does is it allows you to do advanced visualization. By advanced visualization, I mean, what are my options? What are my options if something happens? Am I going to do here? So if you walk into a room that you're not familiar with in another facility, you look around and you say, well, where's the exits? Where are the secondary exits besides the one that I just came in? Is there someplace in here I can hide? Is there someplace I can run? Is there a weapon here I can use? So you advance, you have in your head, what are my options? And it's not a situation where you say, I'm going to run. That's all I'm going to do, because you may not have that option. So you have to look at the run, the hide, and the fight, and have options in mind. You have advanced visualization. It's if I have to run, where am I going to run to? If I have to hide, where am I going to hide? What am I going to hide behind? If I have to fight, what am I going to do? What am I going to fight with? So you have those options in mind because you don't know necessarily that either one or the other of those options is going to be the best. So by having situational awareness on what's going on around you, and then having that advanced visualization, you're going to have options in mind, and that's going to allow you to react quick. It's going to allow you to react quicker to what's going on. And that's especially critical in an active shooter event. What happens a lot is people that haven't done advanced visualization and thought about ahead of time, what am I going to do if I'm involved in an active shooter event? How am I going to react? If you haven't visualized it and thought about it, and all of a sudden you're confronted by somebody with a gun, what are a lot of people's initial reaction to that? You think they're immediately going to, as soon as they see that gun, they're going to immediately run, or they're going to immediately fight? A lot of people's initial reaction is going to be, this can't be real. I'm not in this situation. And how many seconds does it take while it's sinking in? That, this is a gun. This is a serious situation. It only takes 2 or 3 seconds of delay, difference between not getting shot and not getting shot. So you have to have that preparedness in your mind as what am I going to do in this type of situation? What are my options? And if I see something like that, react immediately. You've got to react immediately. That's the difference between getting shot and not getting shot. And I've talked about this before. Our public health people know about it, but when the San Bernardino Public Health Department shooting took place, they were in a situation where it was either a meeting or a training, I'm not exactly sure which, that they were having in one room, and the whole department was there, and the shooter was actually a member of that department. So this was an inside type of job, and that person was, I think, in the process of being fired. I don't know whether he'd been fired yet or not, or whether it was because but apparently they were still expected to show up at this training. And so that individual left the training room and went and got his wife and guns, and they both came back in. So what had happened was they had active shooter training for that department. And as luck would have it, instead of everybody being sitting here like you are with their back to the door where the shooters came in, their AV system had broke down doing their presentation, so they had an unanticipated break. So a lot of people were not in the room, and other people were standing around. They weren't sitting down looking in the other direction. So when those shooters came in the back door, or in the front door, I should say, people that were looking around, paying attention, they saw them. And they dived for cover, and the ones that didn't see them right away were the ones that got shot. So just an example of, even in a situation where you're in a meeting or a training room, where if you don't have situational awareness as what's going on, you could, and you don't react quickly enough, you could get shot. So that's why we harp so much on having that awareness and trying to visualize what you're going to do in advance and to know what's going on in any situation. And a lot of times you can detect when you go into a room that you're not familiar with, and you can detect if the activity that's going on there is normal or not. And because you expect certain types of things to be going on in a grocery store or a library or a government office or wherever, but you can kind of detect as you're looking, something doesn't seem right here, and then you start looking to see what it is, and you may actually detect the threat before it actually becomes apparent to everybody else, before it actually becomes an overt threat. So we teach this a lot in our active shooter training. That's why I encourage people to sign up for that. Okay. So we talked about run, we talked about hide. Now, if you had to fight, now visualize the situation here. Say we were in a room. It's just a small training room. It's got chairs and tables in it. That's all it's got in it. And we're sitting here. There's 15 of us or however many sitting in the training room. I'm the instructor, so I'm standing up here. You guys are sitting there behind tables. And there's only one exit in that room. And other than the tables and chairs, there's nothing to hide behind. And the exit and the entrance are right there, and an active shooter comes in through that door. So what are we going to do? What are we going to do? Or at the alternate thing is say the door, the door is behind me, and they come through that door. Either way, what are you going to do? Well, is there any place to run? Is there any place to hide? So the option is fight, right? So what are we going to fight with? That's true, but first of all, typically when you're sitting in a room like that and you're sitting at your table, well, what have you got sitting in front of you, in front of you? A pen, a notebook? You have a laptop? Do you have a container of water or one of your heavy containers of stuff sitting in front of you a lot of the times? And like you said, you've got pens, you've got other things. What are all those things? They're weapons. And one of the things we teach, and I'm not going to get into it because we don't have time, but one of the things that we teach an active shooter is actually a concept that was developed by an Air Force colonel about how you, and it's called the OODA loop, and I won't go into what OODA means, but it actually means observe, orient, decide, and act. But what the OODA loop is something we do 1,000 times a day. We observe something, we orient ourselves to it, we decide what we're going to do in that situation, and we act. So the quicker we can speed up our OODA loop, and that's why I talked about situational awareness, the faster we can react. But the other thing is, that shooter's got an OODA loop too. So if you disrupt his OODA loop before he actually gets to the end of it to act where he pulls the trigger, guess what? He has to start that loop all over again. And it may only take him a half a second or a second and a half to do it, but then you disrupt it again. And then he has to reset again before he pulls the trigger. So what are you doing if you're throwing all this stuff in front of you at his face? You're distracting him and you're disrupting his OODA loop. And is he going to be, if you're throwing stuff at his face and he's doing this, is he going to be able to shoot accurately at you? No. So while you're throwing that stuff at him, then some of the rest of you are picking up the chairs and you start throwing stuff at him. You're still going after him. Keep distracting him as much as possible. Give you a chance to use your weapons. But what's the other thing you've got in that room that's a big strength that you've got? Exactly. How many of you are there? 15. How many shooters are there? 1. If you don't do anything, how many of you are going to get shot? 15 probably. But what happens if while some of you are trying to distract him, throwing stuff at him, you've got strength in numbers, the rest of you rushing? How many of you may get shot? Hopefully none, but probably at the most 2 or 3. And those might not be kill shots. I mean, you're going to be shot anyway if you don't do anything. But if you rush him, you're going to be able to get, some of you are going to get to him and take him down. So you've got strength in numbers. And, and this is a bad situation I just talked about, but, if you're in another situation where you're in a position where you're hiding and you can ambush the guy when he shows up, that even increases your chances. If you can ambush him, he doesn't see you, and you jump out and grab him when he's, before he's not looking. So there's things you can do in a situation where you work together and where you react immediately, and you can actually survive. And I preach this all the time in the active shooter training. You can survive active shooter events. You can't go into it with the idea, a lot of people do, if there's an active shooter event, I'm dead, there's nothing I can do. I just hope it doesn't happen to me. But if you go in with the idea that you're going to survive and that you've developed ideas ahead of time on how you can do that, and you've got that situational awareness and you've got options in mind, yeah, you can survive. So I probably belabored that enough, but that's just briefly some of the things we cover in our active shooter training. So use surprise, use aggression, and use strength in numbers. If you have to come to close quarters with that guy, and all you got in your hand is this pen, that's a weapon, ain't it? Where are you going to stick that? Eye, throat, ear, and there's all the other vulnerable parts too. You don't pull any punches, kick, bite, and I always say, if you have to grab the shooter by the genitals and just grab and twist and shout and yell, but anyway, Another thing I haven't talked about is actually yelling is a distraction. There was a coach in a high school that actually stopped an active shooter event by yelling, because a student came in that he knew and started shooting in the cafeteria, and he was across the cafeteria and yelled at the kid, yelled his name. Kid stopped shooting at students and started chasing the coach. And they were able to take him down. And all he did was yell to distract him. So, if you're throwing stuff at the guy, yell and scream and do whatever you can, to distract him. So, don't go to your normal assembly areas. Get out of the area. Don't go and assemble out where you normally do as a big target. And when you get somewhere safe, call 911 and report everything you've observed. And if you've actually observed the shooter, what he's wearing, what he looks like, then you need to report that too, so law enforcement knows what the guy looks like, because sometimes they have a hard time distinguishing between individuals who are actually normal workers and the active shooter, if he's got his gun hidden in some way. So if you're approaching or being approached by responding officers, lie down or hold your empty hands in the air and follow all directions from police immediately. Do not point or shout. If you have a weapon, put it down and get away from it. So, if you have, the officers are going to come in the first officers here, they're coming in to stop the shooter. They're not coming here to help you. If people are wounded, they're going to step over the wounded and go stop the shooter. And they're going to be keyed up and they're going to be looking for anything. So say if I'm standing here and I'm talking to you guys and I got my cell phone here and law enforcement comes through the door there, and I've been hiding here and I've called 911, and law enforcement comes running through the door, and I stand up and I say, hey, look, everybody, here's law enforcement. What's going to happen to me? I will get shot. I mean, even if I got an empty hand, even if I'm just pointing with a finger, they may not be able to determine what I'm doing. So I'm liable to get shot. So you got to avoid friendly fire in these situations as well. So you got to be sure to follow all police directions when they come in. You got to be sure not to be pointing. Don't be running right at them. Well, sometimes they may tell you to go ahead and run on and get out or whatever. But anyway, don't do anything that's going to potentially cause them to shoot at you. And the other thing you need to know is if you're hiding behind a locked door, waiting for law enforcement to come, and somebody bangs on the door and says, it's law enforcement, are you going to open the door right away? Nope. Now, I will say that most active shooter events are over in 3 or 4 minutes. So if you've been locked down for half an hour, probably whoever's knocking the door probably is law enforcement. But nonetheless, you don't know that. So the best thing to do if you got your cell phone is you call 911 and say, I've got somebody knocking on the door saying it's law enforcement. Is that law enforcement or is it somebody else? So anyway, you don't evacuate if you think the shooter's outside the building. Obviously, it'll be a lockdown situation, and then there again, you have to stay away from outside windows and doors. If you call from a landline, or even from a cell phone, and you've got a situation going on where it's actually right there, the confrontation or the shooting is going on, even if you have to hide or whatever, sometimes if you leave the phone open, then the 911 dispatch can hear what you're saying, and hear what's going on out at your location. So sometimes that's a help as well. But otherwise, if you're not using your phone, you need to have it shut off, so the shooter can't tell you where they're at. Hostage situation. This is a different situation than you're going to have if you have a active shooter event. The active shooter event typically would be a situation where that's where law enforcement are going to come in and they're going to stop the shooter. If they don't think it's an active shooter event, then they're going to respond differently. And we've had that happen in one of our facilities as well. You may think we had a situation where there was an unanticipated panic button push, and law enforcement showed up, and people wondered, well, why didn't they come in shooting? Well, they didn't, because it was a panic button push, and when they showed up, there was only one panic button push. There was no 911 calls. When they showed up, there was no shooting going on. There was no people running around screaming. So they said, well, maybe it's a hostage situation. So then they're going to cordon off the area. They're going to try to make contact inside without, doing anything as far as going right in and maybe triggering the person who's taking people hostage to start shooting. So a different situation. Okay. So I'm running a little bit behind on here, so I'm going to kind of rush through the last of this. Most of what I've talked about has been situations that we might see most of the time. Some of these others are things that are less likely but could happen. Earthquakes, we don't see too many of those here in Kingman, but we've started to see more shakes around the county than we have in the past. So those of you that have been involved in earthquakes before know that you need to take cover under a sturdy table desk or desk. Don't run outside. A lot of people you see on videos, they're running outside. You don't want to do that because, you're liable to get hit by something falling on top of you. So you want to hide under something that's sturdy. You don't want to hide under a doorway like they used to tell you, because unless that doorway is there's a good wall there that's not going to fall on you, because otherwise the wall may fall on top of you. So if they're not a load-bearing wall that's in that situation, you don't want to be in that doorway. So outdoors, obviously you want to stay away from anything that's going to fall on you. And if you're in a moving vehicle, you don't want to go anywhere where something might fall on you. Also, you want to avoid, after the earthquake has stopped, you want to watch for anything that's damaged, bridges, power lines, that type of thing. Power outage, I'm not going to cover that too much because that's not that big a deal. Severe weather events, there again, we don't have a lot of those, but when we do, we'll try to get information out to the departments if we have something that we think is going to directly impact our building, like potentially a tornado or something like that, which doesn't happen very often. We're going to be getting information to our employees in our facilities to get inside and close the windows and move to interior rooms, be prepared to take shelter, stay away from electrical appliances, water, and that type of thing. Field preparation, not going to talk a lot about that because we do have some extra training we can do on that as well, on the people that go out in the field, what they need to do, but particularly to be prepared with everything they need if they get stranded out there, and also to be sure that someone in the office knows where you're going, what your route of travel is, and what your estimated time of return is. You need to have that accountability, so if somebody doesn't show up, you know something's wrong and can go look for them. Flash flooding, everybody knows here about flash flooding. You don't want to be in washes. You don't want to drive through any kind of running water. And that's what happens when we've seen here in the last monsoon season. We've seen people drown because they tried to drive through running water and they should have known better. And it doesn't take much, just a few inches if you're driving to float a vehicle. Lightning, I cover that. That's one of my pet peeves. I cover that because I see it all the time where people are standing out in the yard or on the driveways and, hey, look at the lightning, pretty lightning going on. And if you can hear thunder, you can get hit by lightning. And it's happened. It happened in Kansas when I was there to some kids at a ballpark where the sun was shining at their location and there was a thunderstorm on the horizon. They could hear thunder and they got hit by lightning. So people need to be very careful about understanding that, and also be sure they're not standing under trees or anything else where they're going to get hit by lightning. Tornadoes, not going to cover those too much. Those of you that travel other places might want to look at that so you know what to do if you have a tornado coming at you. But typically the worst place to be is in a car or a mobile home. you're better off actually getting out of your car and laying in a ditch if the tornado is going to hit it than you would be staying in a car. And there again, a lot of the same thing applies with hazmat incidents. If you're running into that when you're traveling, you need to watch out for the accidents where there's semis and a cloud plume of some type. You need to watch out and stay away from that area, stay as far away as possible. If you see the dirt flying up somewhere when you're driving down the road, flying up in the air out beside the highway, that's probably a gas leak. So you're going to be aware to stay away from that as well. I'm not going to get into possible exposure to blood or bodily fluids. A lot of people have taken the bloodborne pathogen, but as I mentioned earlier, that's something that needs to be reported if you think you're exposed, but you're only exposed if you've got a break in your skin or you've got stuff on your face. So, my last slide. It goes back to what I said earlier. You need to be alert all the time, wherever you're at. When you're out and about, whether you're at work, at home, in stores or schools, practice situational awareness, wherever you're at. Ask yourself some of these questions when you're going someplace you're not familiar with. Where are the exits? What are the hazards here? What's the weather forecast? If you're at an outside event, it's possible you're going to have lightning or a windstorm. Where am I going to run, hide, or fight if shooting starts? So it's all part of this situational awareness. And don't be complacent. The chances are we're not going to have, you're not going to have an active shooter event here. That when you look at the odds of it, there's only been, in 20 years, there's only been in Arizona something like 7 active shooter events, depending on your definition of active shooter. Some people count a lot of things that aren't really active shooter, but there's only been like 7 in Arizona, which may have something to do with the fact that we're all armed in Arizona. But nonetheless, it could happen here. The people that got involved in an active shooter event thought the odds were on their side too, but they got caught. So we need to be prepared. We need to be prepared to call 911 with anything suspicious or threatening going on. You need to be decisive. You need to act immediately when something's happening. You need to use your head and be flexible in your response. One thing I threw in here is that I didn't show a video on this either because we didn't have time, but if you're trying to exit somewhere, sometimes it's better to go out a side exit than to use the main exit you just came in, because that's what happened in a nightclub fire here 20-some years ago, where everybody tried to get out that one exit and all jammed up in the exit, and there ended up I think it was 60-some fatalities with everybody jammed out at that exit, and there was an exit at the side that nobody was using. There were windows that people walked by that they didn't throw a chair through that window to get out. So you need to think about all those things. And like I said, if you have to fight a shooter, fight aggressively, use all the weapons you have, use surprise and stealth and strength in numbers. Stay alive and help your friends and your coworkers stay alive. So we have a deal here where you can attach floor plans of your building if you want to your flip charts. And that's pretty much all I had. I run a little bit over what I intended to. But does anybody in the audience have any questions? If not, I appreciate you all coming. And I hope this has been helpful. And this is going to be recorded, so you can always go back and look at it again. Hopefully we'll start to get back on schedule where we're doing these things every year. And we're also setting up a schedule where we're going to be doing more evacuation drills and that type of thing in this building and other buildings. So that's an opportunity for us to also practice our emergency preparedness responses. So thanks a lot. I appreciate it.